host of arguments that atheists give to demonstrate the non-existence of God. I'm going to give you some. I'd like to get your reactions. Top of the list, problem of evil.
God allows evil because he allows us a free choice of whether to bring about good or evil, and he makes us responsible for each other and the world. And if we're to be really responsible, we must have a choice of doing harm or good. And he also allows natural evils in the form of tsunamis and earthquakes and diseases in order to give us the chance to respond by being courageous or being patient in the face of these evils. And he allows us to be sympathetic or not sympathetic to other people in the face of these evils. So they make possible us having responsibility for each other and to form our own character.
Another argument for the non-existence of God is the violence in the universe.
What sort of violence do you have in mind? Do you have in mind the planets clashing into each other?
Sure, asteroids, comets, chaos.
What on earth is wrong with that? Violence is a bad thing, of course, if people get hurt and feel pain, but the smashing of one comet into a planet is a beautiful thing. When we saw, I think it was several years ago, that a comet smashed into Jupiter, and it was watched by everybody on telly as a beautiful thing. The behavior, the regular behavior of the stars and the planets, the regular behavior on top of which there are explosions producing new stars and new planets, these are part of the dance of the heavens. They're wonderful.
If God is all good and all-powerful and all-knowing, why does he allow bad things to happen to good people?
This is, I think, the principal argument for the atheistic side that my opponents in the debates will sometimes bring up. And I think that there's a couple of ways to respond to this. First, we need to understand what the atheist is claiming here. Is he arguing that God and suffering are logically incompatible with each other? If he is, then he needs to show that there's some sort of implicit contradiction there, because there's no explicit contradiction. And I would say that no atheist has ever been able to sustain that burden of proof, to show that there are necessarily true assumptions that would reveal some kind of a contradiction between God and the suffering and evil in the world. In fact, I think we can prove that they are compatible by just adding a third proposition, and that would be that God has morally sufficient reasons for permitting the evil and suffering in the world. As long as that's even possible, it shows that God and evil are logically compatible. So that logical version of the argument doesn't work. Now, very quickly, there's a probabilistic version of the argument which says, all right, God and evil are logically compatible, but nevertheless, it's highly improbable that God exists, given the evil and suffering in the world. And I think there's a number of moves that the theist can make in response to that argument to show that it's not improbable that God exists, given the suffering in the world.
How would you explain them? Why then does God have to allow discomfort, suffering, pain,
Sure.
terrible pain sometimes to exist?
Well, I would say, Michael, that there isn't any single reason. Rather, there's a multitude of reasons that would be in play here. One would be that God wants to create a world of free creatures who can become responsible moral agents and mature persons. And that will require a world that operates according to certain natural laws, where the fire that warms you can also burn you, the water that sustains you can drown you. And it would require the ability of these creatures to do morally evil acts. And so creating that sort of an arena, I think, is going to allow the possibility of natural suffering and moral evil to occur. But that God permits these with the overall goal in mind of bringing people freely into a knowledge of himself.